Mr. Edis, I just want to clarify quickly. This WPL map had a total of 766 sites, and that was made up of the Woodall Camper subdivision plat plus the metered utility sites and sites along the waterfront. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we've also recognized early on, there was at least 250 sites that offered some sort of utility.
And Mr. Edis, if you'll take a look at this slide, and this is tab number 9 in your notebook. If you just could explain what this map is.
So again, we were working for Mr. Pappas, and we were trying to get a determination from the county on the number of campsites. So we took that information that I just went through, we overlaid it onto one plat. This is using WPL's information plus our information. We blocked out areas and said, well, maybe they were future areas, but they're not readily, people aren't going to be able to readily camp there because it would require some land clearing or something. And so we were trying to come up with, and so 759, we had removed a couple of sites that had some X's on the Woodall plat. But that's everything that we just talked about. And the highlighted areas represent what we call on the plat future camping. We proposed to add some minor site features to sort of delineate the pathways so that they could delineate their sites. And we discussed putting in some sort of signs or markers to say these are campsites, because there currently really wasn't anything other than a check-in map behind a big glass picture frame in the camp store to say here's a site or here's not a site. So we submitted that to the county, and it was that application came back to us incomplete. Can't give you the exact words, but the county did not agree with that rationale.
Mr. Edis, if you'll take a look at this next map, and it is behind tab 10 of your notebook, could you tell us what this is?
It's essentially the same map, just without the highlighted areas.
And this map shows 759, roughly 3,000 square foot sites on the property. Is that right?
Correct. From that 766, we found 7 that just didn't seem like they could ever really be a site.
Okay. And you spoke just a moment ago about the check-in map, and if you'll take a look at the slide, is this what you were referring to?
Correct.
And that's behind tab 6. Mr. Edis, could you explain your understanding of what this map is?
I saw this map for a long time before it became the reference in the county's letter of determination. But it was, my understanding is it was a check-in map that staff at the lodge used, just sort of help guide people to places where there were utility connections.
As a professional in this field, is this a site plan or a plat?
It's a sketch.
It's a sketch.
Yeah, it's a sketch.
Okay.
As Chairman Breathwaite pointed out, there's no scale, so it's difficult to. But it's what they had. I mean, certainly today's standards we wouldn't submit a site plan like this, but.
Based on your review of the property and the acreage, does this sketch, as you called it, include the entire property?
Does not.
Generally, what portions of the property are not included on this site sketch?
Well, it'd be easier maybe to look at another. There's no way to do them side by side, but it's maybe a little over half, but it doesn't show. So there's a pier, for reference. There's a pier. I think that's the pier. It kind of shows this. Kind of cuts the property there, and And we understand that this area has been used, and this is part of the campground as well, so it just doesn't show the whole site.
Mr. Edis, I think those are all the questions I have for you at this time, although we would ask that the maps that Mr. Edis identified be admitted into the record if they're not already.
Just so I understand, you're talking behind tab 2 through 11, excuse me? Tabs 2 through 11? I think that's where he's starting.
I think it would be 2 through 10.
2 through 10.
2 through 10.
Yes, 2 through 10, okay.
Yes, that's 2 through 10.
Okay. Only have a couple of questions. So what you have presented here, Mr. Edis, is this a representation of the potential number of campsites that could be in existence there at some point?
Yeah, my interpretation is that 458 number, which included just the areas where you could easily access them with a car, with a truck, with a trailer, with an RV, that they, that was there. I mean, if you, and I think it's, how do you look at a campsite? What is a campsite? And that's kind of the question we always ask ourselves is if it's open ground and it's available, I mean, that seems like, but we did use the metric of 3,000 square feet. So you saw all the tools we used. I mean, so that was kind of our interpretation.
Right. So, and you may not have the answer to this question, but do you know exactly how many campsites were in use in actuality in 2012?
I've heard it's variable. I've heard that during peak times, you've heard other folks speak to it, but no, I don't have any personal firsthand knowledge. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody?
And are these potential campsites you've mentioned, the, I guess 439 and 766, are those full hookups?
No.
No.
There was 250 of the sites have some variation of water, sewer, and electric. Maybe 234 has all three, but then there's some sites that have, maybe they don't have sewer, but they've got water and electric. It was also my understanding from speaking with the former owners that there used to be more electrical service that went further out in the site, but it was all, I guess, aluminum wiring. It was old stuff. And so over the years, maybe things didn't get repaired, but throughout time, that those areas we're showing throughout time, they were available for use. Now, whether or not, it's like having a clothing store. I mean, if you've got full of clothes and people only buy a few things, I mean, you still have a full store full of opportunities there. So, I mean, it's just about who shows up. I don't know.
So of the existing sites that are full hookup, where are the septic systems and leach fields for those sites? Do we know?
We do know there was 25, there still is 25 existing septic systems. Yeah, that might be best. In addition to like a pump and haul tank, so that people that weren't directly connected to sewer could come and they could come by and unload, or they had a honey wagon that would go around and take it from them and put it in the pump and haul tank. And the pump and haul tank was down here by it exists, and it's down here by the existing bathhouse. There's an existing bathhouse there. And I can't see that well anymore. I'm getting a little old.
Which tab is that?
It's tab 5.
Tab 5.
But there is an existing brick bathhouse on site. And right beside it, there's a septic tank for pump out. And the 25 sites are generally all spread all throughout the area where I'm pointing, all kind of Some of them are uniform, and some of them are fairly, they're mostly uniform. And what we found is that they were actually installed well, and they were still functioning. But there were some, they were all at the end of their service life. And so what we recommended was that, and we had at the time, we had a certified septic inspection person that worked for our company, and he more or less recommended that, you know, that it was time for them to be replaced. And, you know, some of those systems were put in the 70s and perhaps before. So there was, you know, at least 25 systems in there, and some of them had 4 trailers hooked up to them, some of them had 8. I mean, it was just kind of that's just the way it was done.
Okay, thank you.
So this is, I see that there are campsites platted out on this map. How many campsites does this map represent? So the one you were showing before shows the potential if you put someone on every 3,000 square feet in.
Correct. What this reflects is our June, I believe June 28th of this past summer, so June 28, 2018. On behalf of Blue Water, we submitted a site plan. And, you know, you'll notice there's an open area there where we showed there could be sites, but there's an open area there because I believe there's a ball field, or there was formerly a ball field. And we also want to relocate some of the septic systems because some of the existing septic systems are not in desirable locations. They're a little closer to the water. They meet code, but if you were going to modernize the site, that would be one thing that we were thinking you would want to do is upgrade the septic systems so that they function properly, and so that people aren't driving on them, et cetera.
How many
I'm
sites
sorry,
is
you
this?
asked me a specific question.
Yeah.
That's 314 RV sites and 78 tent sites. That was the submittal in June of 2018. And that was, we were directed in working with Blue Water to kind of come up with a quote-unquote compromise number.
And of these sites listed here, do we know how many of these sites have actually had campers on them in the past?
Which goes back to that, what you were calling the potential map. I mean, we contend that I can't, you know, I wasn't there in 2012 or 2010, but, you know, those chances were there. You know, whether they put an RV in those spots or not, the opportunity was still there. And we felt like that was reasonable because we weren't saying, well, we're going to put them out in the wetlands or we're going to put them in the trees where it's too dense to pull a trailer. We're going to put them in places that it would be reasonable, or we had some other evidence that trailers were there. The road that's behind the store, that over the years is historically where people that had their seasonal trailers that didn't want to drag them home, they'd park them there, boats, RVs. I mean, yeah, boats, RVs, ski-doos, et cetera. And so then over by the, I gotta figure out how to use this. This is called the Cedars, and I believe in your packet there's and others will talk more about this, but there's a stargazing group that's used that area for 20-plus years. It's well documented. It was in one of the Virginia papers. So it's not, you know, we didn't make it up. I mean, that's there. And so of these 314, it's, you know, it's our tent sites, we proposed 78. And earlier, you know, I mentioned that we thought maybe we could say there was 50 there, but that was our site plan submittal in June. And that's what sort of initiated this exchange with the county. Well, that's not true. We initiated the exchange with the county further back than that, but when the property changed hands, we still were trying to get at this number. And so we decided that we needed to submit a formal site plan to the county and request, you know, this is what we believe is existing, and here's why, and now please tell us, and here we are. This is where we got to.
So I guess is it a fair statement to say that that collectively we believe that the number of RV sites is in the range somewhere between 234 and 314? based on the staff testimony and
Yeah, I would raise the 314 number. I would agree with your 234. But I would say that my upper limit remains 458. And that's from our previous studies. And,
but this is the plat you submitted to the county, correct?
correct.
Okay.
And I'll just add that it was, not to interrupt, but I'll just add that it was seen as a good faith attempt at some sort of a compromise.
Mr. Edis, I have a question for you in regards to the Woodall plat under tab 7. Tell me where this plat was derived. Was it derived from the Register of Deeds office, or was it held in hand by the previous owner?
I believe the county had it in their archive, and I think that also Mr. Pappas had a copy. And is that true? I know that it didn't come from us. I know that Mr. Pappas had a copy, but I thought that the county had a copy of it somewhere.
And if I understood everyone's testimony thus far and the evidence presented by the county, this plat was never submitted to the planning department to be approved for the number of lots on this plat.
It was my understanding that it went before the Board of Commissioners, but was not. They said you have to post a bond, and that was the end of the trail.
So it has never been officially approved by the Board of Commissioners.
We don't think so.
If you'll move to map, let's say tab 8. This was aerial view with the Woodall plat superimposed upon it,
Correct.
done by others. I understand your company did not do this. This was done by WPL.
Correct.
Something that bothers me on this particular aerial view with the superimposed plat upon it is the wording that exists above the word Hampton Lodge Camping Resort. The first word there says possible. It does not say actual, or it just doesn't say existing. It just says possible. What would be your interpretation of that language?
I would agree that that is possible. I think the value in this plat is that, from our understanding of the history of the ordinance with regard to campsites, is that 3,000 square feet was the guiding principle. And what these lots do is they show a configuration of campsites that are 3,000 square feet. So when Mr. Serene, back in 1972, prepared this plat, I think he had that guidance, and that's where he went with it. So, for us, it's a convenient tool that we can superimpose that. I mean, we've since put this in CAD for real, and our subsequent maps take this information and made sure that they were actually 3,000 square feet. But I agree with you. Those are possible. They're not. I'm not sitting here telling you that there were 766 sites that existed. That's why I got to the 458, because I felt like you had to take this for what it was and then look at the facts on the ground, so to speak, the wetlands, the trees, other features, property boundaries, et cetera. And I mean that you backed away from that number, and that's kind of how we got to our number.
And isn't it true, Mr. Edis, that on this same map, this aerial view with the Woodall subdivision superimposed upon it is a representation of a possible subdivision of the land that has never been officially adopted by the Currituck County Board of Commissioners?
Can you direct me to where a subdivision?
I mean, this entire Woodall subdivision plat, the same tab, the same map.
Yeah, so the entire campground, the 450 acres, is 4 parcels, plus a lot of easements and other sort of mysterious things that we unearthed during our ALTA survey. But we've kind of gotten to the point with the county that this is one whole campground. And I don't know that, these would be quote unquote subdivided and you know, I could deed you one lot. I mean, we've seen that happen in some places, but I know that with the way the campground was run, there's no exchange of land happening. There's no titles, no deeds. These are just spaces, and we kind of think of them, at least I've thought of them as parking spaces. They're 3,000 square foot parking spaces for your tent, for your family, whatever.
But my interpretation of these spaces, as you call them, that are superimposed upon this aerial view have never been approved by the Currituck County Board of Commissioners. Is that true?
It is true. You're correct.
Any other questions?
I have a couple. Maybe I'm going to be switching gears slightly from you, but as the engineering firm responsible for looking over a lot of this stuff, I assume that some of your duties you were charged with was doing a complete condition surveys of all the facilities on the site, or did you just spend most of your time doing mapping?
When you mention facilities, are you talking about structures?
I'm talking about structures, water sewer systems, electrical systems.
Yeah. So
Because I did hear you say a few minutes ago that one of the people on your staff, was certified in septic tanks and that kind of operation, that looked at some of them and said that they were near the end of their lives, said the same thing about some of the electrical stuff. So I'm just curious. I'm trying to get a handle on what the age is of the facilities.
Sure.
there.
And as far as the electrical goes, I was sharing anecdotal information. We don't do any electrical engineering, and I wouldn't be qualified to talk about any electricity.
I do assume your firm, though, probably does water, wastewater.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I'll tell you that what we've noticed is that throughout this process that water has been a big issue. There's a 3-inch water line that comes from the county, and then from that there's various services. There are several existing water supply wells on the property. You won't be able to see them on the maps of this scale, but I think there's at least 4. And the way they were constructed is that the well would be in one house, and then there'd be a larger shed with treatment systems. Some of them had 2 sheds for each well. And so at some point in time, the wells were no longer used, and then county water came in. There's evidence of an even older well that predates the 4 wells that I'm talking about. So as far as utilities and what we kind of inspected or gave guidance on, it was limited to the wells, the water system, the wetlands, the septic tanks, septic fields, nothing structural, nothing architectural.
Okay. The other question is, so you mentioned something about a sewer dump station, but apparently it's nothing but a tank. There was no drain field attached to that. There was not a system that was designed and
Correct.
installed.
It's a pump and haul.
Okay.
Pump and haul.
Okay.
Which you still see them in some places, but typically it's only done now if there's no other options for a person. But it's not unusual, I don't think, in an RV setting to have that. Marinas will have them as well.
Right. When you talk about 234, whatever the sites are, and even if you go to a higher number of sites, 50 gallons a day per trailer, if if the thing is full, that's 10,000, 12,000 gallons a day. The next question would be, well, I'll just leave it at that. That's the volume of water a day if you've got a full site.
And there's guidance today, state guidance on the amount of water that we need to account for and the amount of wastewater we need to account for with each quote-unquote campsite. And the same is true for bathrooms and other amenities.
Yes.
I mean, if you have X number of guests, you're supposed to have this many bathrooms. And then as engineers, we have to design off of that.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the board?
I have one question for you, Mr. Edis. You stated a moment ago that the county has a 3-inch water line that goes to that property.
Mm-hmm.
With that size water line, would there be adequate fire protection for all of these 700 approximated lots or sites?
We looked
Or
at
should I
it.
say, could a county provide
Yeah.
adequate fire protection with a 3-inch water line?
And the answer would be no. And what we've done on the site plan is that we've got some dry hydrants. We're going to go into the existing pond and provide enough volume, 50-year drought, et cetera, all the things that we have to design for. But some of the buildings didn't have adequate fire protection. They don't have adequate fire protection. We were going to provide that with a dry hydrant, which we've done in other places in the county. It's acceptable. Water is a big issue, and one of the things we proposed is a tank. It's a elevated tank, but it's not like a water tower. It's just a 30-foot tall, 12-foot diameter tank that we can put, we can hide it most anywhere on the site. But what happens is that the existing county pressure, and part of what we do is we have to run the county's water model that's provided by the county engineer. What we did is we looked at that because with this submission, we wanted to demonstrate that we were not going to have an adverse impact on the firefighting capability of anyone down the line. And then we also have to demonstrate that we've got the firefighting capability for our own site. We're able to do that with what we proposed. We did not run a scenario looking at the 766. Obviously, if we did that, we'd have to provide more firefighting capability. It's one of the many things we have to address in the site plan.
What was the maximum number of spaces that you all ran the test for?
We ran it at 350 RV sites, and we were only proposing 314, but we ran it at like 350, just to kind of be conservative. I believe that's correct. I personally don't run the water model, but you always err on the side of caution with those.
So the 78 tent sites have no bearing on that calculation, or do?
Not in that you provide fire access, but the water provision is, that you just have to make sure that the local fire department's truck can get to all places. So there's places like that where you don't necessarily need the water, but you need to make sure the fire truck can get there.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Mr. McCree, and then Mr. Nash.
I don't have any questions.
No? Mr. Nash? Yep, absolutely.
He said he doesn't have any.
Oh, okay, I thought he said he had more questions. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
We would call John Lucky Pappas.
Just sitting down there.
Mr. Pappas, if you could just introduce yourself to the board, who you are, and a little bit about yourself briefly.
My name is John Pappas. I was the former owner of Hampton Lodge, and I purchased it in 1974. I was 35 years old at the time, and it's taken me about 45 years to find somebody that could take this beautiful property and have the ability and the capital to develop it into something it deserves. And quite frankly, I ran out of steam. One of my partners, he's had several strokes, and my other partner's my age, so it was time for us to get out.
Mr. Pappas, other than owning Hampton Lodge, what did you do as a profession?
I practiced law for 52 years and retired 2 or 3 years ago. If you ask my partners, they probably would tell you I stopped 10 years ago, but anyways, another story.
And you and your partners purchased Hampton Lodge in 1974, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And just briefly, can you describe about how often you visited the property as an owner?
Well, I tried to get down there every Thursday, and it was pretty much absentee ownership. Harvey Jameson was my manager for many, many years, and he came with the property when I bought it from Mr. Woodall. And I would meet with Harvey every Thursday. I'd pick up the paperwork. We would go to his house, and Mrs. Jameson would make us sandwiches or whatever. And then we would ride around the campground, and I'd make an inspection, and he'd tell me what we needed to do or what not to do. And basically, nothing really ever changed during the entire time that I've owned the property. I bought a campground. I didn't buy sites. I bought ground, and it was just such a magnificent piece of property that I was going to buy it somehow or another and try to make the campground pay for it. But then I got in there, and Mr. Woodall was in his 80s at that time, and the bulkhead was about to go, and had to go to the bank and borrow the money, put the bulkhead in, and that was on top of the 100% financing that required the purchase of it. And so that limited what we could do with the campground. Bulkhead was the first thing, and then try to clean up the bathrooms. We put in some sites, but probably took out more sites than I put in over the years.
And Mr. Pappas, when you say you put in sites, do you mean that you put in some sort of utility
Pull-throughs.
site?
Pull-throughs. That's all. None of it was sited. All we had was stobs, and some of them had hookups for electricity and water and no sewage, but no site plan was ever recorded. Never. I never had the property surveyed. When I bought it, I didn't have the money to have it surveyed, and I decided I'd take a chance because I only had one property line that abutted to anybody else. The rest of it was water. Goose Castle at that time was connected to the property, but over the years, if the water got high and the guys out there in the boat fishing and they could make their way across the bulrushes, well, they started cutting across there, and after a while it eroded. So I got a piece of land sitting out there, looks like an island.
Mr. Pappas, you said you had hookups on the property. Do you know about how many utility hookups you have on the property, or you had on the property total?
The last time I counted them, and that was after I started negotiating with Blue Water, there were 252. I'm not saying that it had water, sewage, and electricity, but there were 252 hookups, and not what y'all called sites in this plan that was offered with the, what was it, the conditional use permit for the Bluegrass Festival. That's not a plat. That is really a sophisticated sketch. And that came from the John Serene survey that Mr. Woodall had done. And I took it to a friend of mine in Portsmouth, the surveyor, and he just outlined it, like traced it, and just put numbers on it. And what the permit showed was just part of the property, didn't show it all. So it was never ever intended to be a plat. But it was a guide for me, because it was right behind the cash register. And so it was in a frame, had glass on it, and I would go there, and Ann, or whomever was the clerk at the time, they used a grease pencil and put a mark on it so I could get a quick count before I went back home and took the paperwork. That's all it was.
Mr. Pappas, is the sketch you're talking about the one up on the screen right now? And I'll submit to you it's tab 6 in your notebook if you need to see it that way.
I think I can see it. That's what I'm talking about.
And so you submitted this to the county for a special use permit in the mid-90s, is that correct?
That's correct.
And was this ever the total number of campsites that you had at Hampton Lodge Campground at that time?
No, it wasn't. And in my mind, I never dealt in sites. I bought a campground. And a campground meant to me I could use the whole entire ground. And the best evidence, as far as I'm concerned, of that is I mowed that entire campground. I wore out a many a lawnmower and a many a tractor. And when I first bought it, those roads were cut through there, and they had grown over, and it was like going over a cornfield. So, no, I never even thought about sites. If somebody pulled in, I was going to park them somewhere, somehow, because I had to make that note payment. So I never considered the number of sites I had.
So, Mr. Pappas, would you agree then that you had campers that came in both RV hookups that we've been talking about and other types of camping?
Yes, and a lot of times, if we didn't have any sites for them, we'd drag a cord out of the rec center or out of the country store and park them out there in the field and hook them up. And they talked about the stargazers in the cedars. Well, we use those cedars a lot when a storm would come up. We would move trailers that people had left there in storage, and if they weren't tied down, we'd put them in the cedars. We would put the boats in the cedars. We would put the jet skis in the cedars. And we did do some business when a hurricane or a big storm would hit down at the beaches. People were coming down the road, and they'd see Hampton Lodge. They would pull in there, and they were looking for protection, and we put them right into the cedars until we couldn't put any more in there. So, I mean, we were part of the evacuation process.
Mr. Pappas, if you'll look on the screen, and it's behind tab 3, do you recognize this? This is an aerial of the campground. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And I'm going to ask to see if we can point out a couple of places we've been talking about. Could you describe where the cedars are on this map, and I'll see if I can point appropriately. If you can.
The cedars, those clump of trees right there.
Right in here?
Yes.
Okay. And you would have campers camp in that cedars area?
If they wanted to, I'd put tents or whatever in there. I mean, there's an area that was designated on the map earlier that was part of the conditional use permit, said tent. Mm-hmm. Well, John Floor put a little box there, and we put tents. It didn't define a specific area. It was in that general area.
Generally in Raven here?
Yes.
And is that the only place that you all allowed tent camping at Hampton Lodge?
We tried to primarily keep it there, but as everybody here knows, we have a wind tide. And sometimes when that land got soggy, I couldn't put people down there with tents. I'd have to put them somewhere where it was higher. A lot of times the Boy Scouts, back when Boy Scouting was big, they would camp there. And I remember for about 3 years, the girls' sailing team for William and Murray would come and pitch the tents there and go out there and practice whatever they do for their regattas.
Mr. Pappas, did you have a first come, first camp sort of policy at the camp?
Well, I tried to accommodate them with electricity, water, and sewer, but if I didn't and they wanted to do the rough camping, I'd find this place for them. I had only 200 acres. I'm going to find someplace. I really did try to keep them closer to the store so I could keep an eye on them. Mr. Woodall, the predecessor in title, he had his home down there, and he had children and grandchildren. So he thought it'd be a good idea to dig a pond, and he put some campsites down there. And eventually, I took those out because there must have been 12 or 14 of them. The guys that went down there and camped, it was almost like I had a mini camp inside of a big camp, and the rules didn't apply to them. They didn't do what they were supposed to. There was too much drinking, so I got rid of that. And he had about 5 sites on the waterfront that he intended to give to his children. So they were marked, and they were pretty much isolated from the other part of the campground. And then he decided he wasn't going to do that, and he gave a lot to Harvey Jameson, who had worked for Mr. Woodall, that came with me when I purchased the property. And Harvey put a house there, and then we traded land to square the lot up because it was on an angle, and it was driving me crazy to see a house tilted. So we traded property and squared it all. And I ended up buying that from his wife. You know, obviously, I didn't want another partner sitting in the middle of the property and having to go through this process with me tonight or whatever. Everything would get more complicated.
Mr. Pappas, how many campsites would you say that Hampton Lodge Campground accommodated at peak times before January 1st, 2013?
Are you talking about rough camping tents and all, like for a group bluegrass festival?
Like for the Bluegrass Festival, including the electrical hookups?
Close to maybe 400. You remember I had 15 bands there, and those guys, they come in motorhomes, and you got to be careful where you're going to park them, because next thing I know, they're stuck, and I don't have the capacity to get them out. So I got to move them in close. We sold out to all the campers there, so whatever came on top of it, I didn't make an accurate count. But I had more people there on those occasions. But it wasn't a good idea either. But anyways.
And when you said you had about 400 campers, you mean 400 camping units, a tent,
Units with
an
tents
RV?
and everything, yes.
Not 400 individual people?
I don't know how many people were there now. I mean, they all brought kids and that sort of thing.
More than 400 individual people?
Yeah, well, some of them didn't even camp. They just came there for the festival.
Okay. Mr. Pappas, you mentioned a minute ago that there have been about 250 utility hookups. Do you know how long those hookups have been there?
I added very few. There were more when I got there. Somebody said 284. I remember 292 or maybe 294. But it was all aluminum, and everything was right up to the surface. If somebody went in there and put a stake in the ground, next thing I knew, I lost 4 campsites. Then I had to dig it up or get somebody. I didn't do it. Of course, I didn't know how to do it. I had to get somebody to repair it. So it got to the point that just try to consolidate and move things back this way and get away from that front gate. There was a little fishing village up there by Mrs. Myers' house. When I first got there, they had some sites there. In the spring, in 1974, when I bought it, well, it was July, Field and Stream magazine said that Currituck Sound was the bass capital of the United States. There were grasses out there in the sound. So we would get a lot of campers from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, in the early spring to do that fishing. And a lot of them wanted it down there where it used to be a little fishing village. It was like a basin, and it had a channel out to the bay. But,
so, Mr. Pappas,
that is filled, and I got rid of those campsites.
but you're saying historically there had been campsites in addition to the wooded area that's just put on the 96
That's in the
Blue
wooded
Water
area and
map.
over there, but they weren't marked. I'd let them go in there.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pappas, if you'll take a look at the slide, and these pictures are behind tab 12. There's two sets of them. Do you recognize these?
Yes, that's up on the waterfront, and that is a road that cuts through near the Cedars and goes back to the Woodhall area, where it's supposed to have been a lodge. I bought it thinking I was going to get a hunting lodge, and it ended up getting a broken down house. And that tent area is the area where the tent is. Oh, I forget. I know there was some concern about an illegal pier. I didn't know about that pier. And what happened on the pier is I had 11 duck lines that we ran out. And I got a call that I was in violation for putting in a pier. I was stunned. So I called, and what happened, I don't know whether it was Ducks Unlimited, but the hunters that were going out to their blind, there was a dock there, and they thought they were doing a grand thing, and they repaired it without any permit. I didn't even know they were going to do it. They just did it to accommodate themselves. So I don't want y'all to think that I went out here and did something illegally. Everything I've done, I've gotten a permit.
Mr. Pappas, is that Pier 8 that we talked about earlier?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm going to take a look back at this map real quick. The picture of the road that we looked at, can you point out about where that road goes into on this map? Or if you'll tell me, I can, is it back this way?
Well, there's a road here, and there's another one that comes here, and they connect here. That road over here, there's a fence going down it, and the property line runs on the other side of that fence.
And would you have people use those roads to access places to put tents and trailers to camp at?
They would have to if they were going into the Cedars.
And if you'll take a look at the pictures on the screen, and these are more pictures behind tab 12, do you recognize these?
That looks like it's in the Cedar area.
And would you agree that there's some open field in between some of the cedar trees?
Yes, it has to be. They couldn't get the trailers in there.
And we've heard a lot about the stargazers. Can you just describe what that is and what they use this area for?
When they first started coming down there, it was like it was a perfect setting for them. But then when the Outer Bank developed with all those homes, what was total darkness now looks like Long Island. It distracted their ability to see clearly. But the best place that they could find, according to what they told me, and where they could park their campers and so forth, was there in the Cedars. So they have been coming down, I'd say, 25 years. They're very, very serious people. That equipment costs thousands of dollars that they've got down there, and they look at the, I guess they look at the stars and whatever else is out there.
Mr. Pappas, was this the Stargazer Party, a group of people who would come down and pull their tents and RVs into the Cedars and look through their telescopes?
Yes.
It is.
You have some pictures of them, do you not?
I don't think we included them here, but if you'll look under tab 11.
Well, I've got them.
Do you recognize what these? Oh,
Yeah, see this? That's my book. Is this what you're talking about?
that's a road into the Cedars.
Yes.
It is, yes, and that's behind tab 12. And the other picture's behind tab,
That's the 10.
where the picnic table and the trailer are. Is that how they would pull in their trailers and campers?
Yeah.
They would. And Mr. Pappas, if you'll look behind tab 11 of the notebook, there are some receipts there. Do you recognize those?
Yeah, there are receipts where the stargazers checked in for the, whatever dates are on these receipts. They came from the store. It's just indication that they were there and they rented the spots.
Mr. Pappas, would you agree that in the site, the check-in would write tent Cedars or Cedars area, indicating that they were camping in that Cedars
Yes.
area while they
Yes.
were there?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. That's all the questions I have for you right now.
All right. I don't have any questions at this time. Does anyone on the board have any questions of Mr. Pappas?
I only have one question, sir. In your testimony, you mentioned that the entire time you owned the property, you never submitted any plats to the county. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
I paid.
Were you ever asked for one from the county?
No, I was.
With all the changes in the UDO?
No, I bought a campground. I was not concerned about how many sites were there. I bought a campground. I paid taxes for 40-some years until I sold it on campground. Didn't say anything about sites. Campground. So to me, it meant the whole thing was a campground. So if I was filled up on sites, I'd put them somewhere.
Any other questions? Mr. McCree?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Nash?
Mr. Pappas, I just have one question. You heard Mr. Edis say that when he asked you how many campsites you had, you said you just didn't know how many. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't know how many
Campsites you had?
I'm not counting sites. I'm counting a campground. But when I sold this thing, I went and counted, and I had 252 hookups.
All right.
Hookups and sites, to me, are something different.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pappas. Okay. All right. I'd like to announce a 5-minute recess, and we'll return and finish the hearing. I'd like to go ahead and reconvene. Yeah, I know they're tired. Okay, at this point, I would like to open up the public hearing and ask for any comments from the public.
Well, and Mr. Braithwaite, if we
Yeah.
could just, before you do that, the community group is, Mr. Nash, I believe, said he had 3 witnesses. So he would need to go first, and then we would move to that part.
Okay.
I think that's a little unusual from what
Okay.
you're
Yeah,
following. because
gotcha.
We actually
Yeah.
have 3 people who are going to be presenting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nash?
I apologize, just before Mr. Nash starts, I failed to do it before, we would ask to enter into evidence the receipts and photos under tabs 11 and 12 and the PowerPoint that it's in your notebook under
Okay.
tab 1. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I am Tom Nash. I practice with the firm of Trimpe & Nash in Elizabeth City. And I'm here on behalf of a non-incorporated group of folks called the Water Lily Protection Association, whom I would ask to stand up at this point. Thank you. Basically, to summarize our position, we feel that the county planner got it right. And so I'm going to put on 3 witnesses briefly. Jim Markert, Judy Jones, and Paul O'Neill. So I'd like to call Jim Markert. State your name, please.
Jim Markert, and I live on Piney Island Road, which is a spur of Water Lily Road. I've got a workshop, and I'm also the riparian landowner to the campground. The only other line between them and me is water.
So you're right. Your home is right there at the gate.
It is. Well, my workshop is, and I spend the majority of my time there.
How long have you lived there?
The farm has been part of my family for way before I was born. So I've been familiar with it for 71 years.
So it's fair to say you're a lifelong resident of Currituck County.
I am, yes.
Now, are you familiar with the campground?
Yes.
How are you familiar with it?
Being a riparian landowner, I see it every day. And I've been friends with the former owners for a lot of years, the caretakers, Mr. Jamerson, and I also knew the former owner and the Slades that took care of it, and they were all been friends of mine. And I've been on the campground when I needed to go and maybe go up to the store for some ice cream or go talk to somebody or need a little bit of help with something there at the shop.
Describe, if you will, what you observed with regards to campsites and overall footprint prior to 2013.
Prior to 2013, I feel like that the best I remember, all the campsites along the waterfront were in existence. I don't know the hookup status of any of them. Wasn't any of my business. I'd pass them going to the store, and in about 1985, Mr. Jamerson hired me to put in some bulkheading at the very back corner there. So I was in there every day for a month or more, putting in some bulkhead and observed, things coming and going when I was going, but not attempting to tend to their business or anything. But I'm familiar with what was going on around me.
Now, after 2013, when the UDO was passed, have you visited the site since then?
Oh, yes, yes.
And what did you observe 2013 forward versus the period before that?
I can't say there's been a lot of change. It's been pretty much status quo the whole time.
You ever recall there being any individual tent campsites?
No, I do not.
All right,
I saw a sign, but I've never seen any tent campers there.
all right. That would be the questions I would have for Mr. Markham.
Okay. Any questions from the board? I have none.
Were you, I have one.
Okay.
Yes, for, were you aware of the Woodalls wanting 780 or whatever it was
No, ma'am.
campsites?
No, ma'am, I was not aware
That he
of
went
that.
to the board and?
I did go to the Bluegrass Festival. I don't remember a lot of it, but I came by boat, so I don't.
I think this would have been.
I don't
before-
remember
this
how
would
many
have been-
people-
This would have been in your youth.
Yeah, right.
So you knew the Woodalls, but you didn't know that they wanted to get all those lots approved?
No, I
all those
did not.
campsites?
I knew the Woodalls, yes, but I didn't know any of their business as far as what they wanted to do with the campground or whatever.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, you have questions?
I do have a couple questions, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Markham, do you live there on that property, or you said about the shop, but you didn't clarify that for me?
I built a workshop just outside the gate, 200 yards away, and I'm in my shop.
But
most
you
of the
don't,
time.
you don't have a house there, you just
No,
have a
I do
shop?
not. But I spend majority 7 days a week there at the shop.
Right. When you said you put in the bulkhead
I did.
sometime, when was that? Just out of
Like
curiosity,
1985 or 6, I don't remember exactly.
do you know what time of year it was?
It was in the summer.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Okay. Mr. McCree?
No question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come down. I'd like to call Judy Jones.
Evening.
State your name, please.
My name is Judy Jones, and I live at 947 Water Lily Road.
How long you've lived there?
My whole life.
You grew up there? And,
Yes, I grew up,
lived
born
there
and bred.
the whole time. What is your occupation?
I'm a tax clerk at the local tax office.
Are you familiar with the Hampton Lodge campground?
Yes, sir.
How are you familiar with it?
Just living there in Water Lily my whole life, visiting family and friends there when they camped at the campground.
And so you actually went on the
Yes.
campground?
Yes.
Did
We
you-
went swimming and went out in the boat.
And what did you observe in those early years, and this is before 2013, with regards to campsites and the overall footprint?
It's been the same as far back as I can remember.
Even after 2013?
Yes.
And did you visit the site after 2013? For what reason?
Well, we live in the area, of course, and we would go to the store every now and then and buy a loaf of bread, gallon of milk, that sort of thing, and just ride and visit the neighborhood.
Do you recall there ever being any specific campsites laid out?
No, sir.
And what was stored behind the rec center or the store there? What was behind that?
The only thing I have observed is like personal watercraft, like the Sea-Doos and jet skis, that type thing.
Okay, so no RVs or anything like that? Okay. Have you ever seen a swimming pool there?
No, sir.
A
We swam in the
volleyball
Currituck
court?
Sound.
Volleyball court?
No, sir.
Shuffleboard court?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And have you observed any real maintenance, upkeep, or improvements in the years you have visited the campground?
No, sir. It's deteriorated.
All right. That would be my questions.
Okay. I have no additional questions. Anyone else on the board? Okay.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. One, you say you live at 947? Where is that in relation to the
Approximately
campground?
about 3 miles south of the campground.
Okay, okay. That's all, that's the only question I have.
Okay.
Okay. Mr.
No
McCree?
question.
Okay. Thank
Mr.
you.
Dow. I'd like to call Paul O'Neill. State your name, please.
Paul O'Neill.
What is your occupation?
I'm a commercial insurance agent.
Where you live?
893 Water Lily Road.
And where is that in relation to the campground?
It would be about 3 miles south of the campground.
How long have you lived there?
Probably 50 years.
All right. So, are you familiar with the campground itself?
Absolutely. As a teenager growing up, we would ride our bicycles up there and go to the country store and get ice cream and stuff. And I got to know Harvey Jamerson. We called him Uncle Harvey, which he liked to be called. So in 1980, the fall of 1980, he offered me a job and asked me would I like to work after school up there. And I said, yeah. And he said he wanted me to clean up around the campsites. So cleaning up around the campsite was not a weed eater, and it was not Roundup. It was a flat spade shovel, and I had to go to the actual campsites that existed, and I had to go around them with that shovel all the way around and cut a spot out the width of a spade, so when they mowed, they didn't have to worry about getting the lawnmowers too close to the camp receptacles and posts and trees.
So, your employment allowed you to come in contact with all of the campground area?
Absolutely.
And based on your work and familiarity with the campground, do you have an opinion as to how many campsites there were in 1980?
There was between 175 and 200 campsites in 1980.
What structures were there, if any?
There was a country store, there was a restroom that had a laundry room, and there was a rec hall.
Were there any...
And then, of course, there was where Mr. Jameson lived, which was a house out at the gate.
Were there any specifically designated tent sites?
There was a site that's been alluded to up here tonight, and it had a sign that said tent camping. And I've probably seen 2 tents there in my whole life.
Did it have no cookers, no designated sites?
No, sir. There was maybe a picnic table or 2, and that was it.
Now, at one point, at some point, you were elected to the Currituck County Board of Commissioners. Is that right?
That's correct, in 94.
And how long did you serve?
I served from 1994 till 2006, and then from 2008 till 2016.
Did you also serve as chairman of the board?
Many terms, yes, sir.
Okay. And in your capacity as a county commissioner, did you have an occasion to visit the campground in 1995, 96?
Yes, sir. I received a phone call from Mr. Jameson, who was the manager. It seemed that the zoning department had gone up there and cited them for illegal structures that were attached to the campers. There had always been an issue of people living there year-round, and the county went up there and did a sweep and cited all those structures, and Mr. Jamerson came to me and asked me to ride up there with him, and we physically rode the campground where the campsites were and looked at those campers with the structures attached. And that was a zoning decision. It was not something that I, as an elected official, could relieve him of the penalties or the violations, he had to go through the process.
What did you observe when you went up there with him with regards to number of campsites and overall footprint compared to the 1980?
Unchanged.
Now, were you on the Board of Commissioners in 2013 when the board passed a uniform development ordinance?
Yes, sir, I was.
And did this ordinance address campgrounds?
Yes, sir, specifically.
What campgrounds?
There's a campground in Knott's Island, there's a campground in Bell's Island, and there's a campground on Church's Island or Water Lily. It addressed those three.
And those campgrounds were made non-conforming or designated non-conforming?
That's correct. There was a ordinance written, and it was sent to the planning board, where it was duly advertised per the North Carolina general statutes. The planning board passed it unanimous, sent it to the Board of Commissioners, where it was duly advertised by the North Carolina general statutes. A public hearing was held in which no one objected to the nonconformity, nor did anyone object to the number of lots that the county recognized. It passed unanimous, and it's never been adjudicated or questioned until now.
What is your understanding of non-conforming?
Well, there are several instances in Currituck County and the UDO. One was mobile home parks. At some point in the past, the county decided they did not want to see the expansion of mobile home parks. So they passed an ordinance making those non-conforming, meaning that you could not add units to it and you could not improve or change, because non-conforming means you want that use to go away. Then the same happened with junkyards. We had some junkyards along the highway. Former Board of Commissioners said that junkyards were non-conforming uses, meaning they could not be expanded or improved. Then the next Unified Development Ordinance nonconformity was billboards. There was a proliferation of billboards in the county, and the Board of Commissioners made those nonconforming, meaning that they could not expand them, increase, do anything but maintain them as they are. And the same applies to campgrounds. They were deemed as nonconforming, meaning they could not be expanded or modified and improved.
Now, with particular emphasis on Chapter 8 of the UDO that was passed, dealing with nonconformities, Section 8.2.6 deals with non-conforming campgrounds. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And was it the board's intent that this section be the only section which applies to campgrounds?
No, sir, it was not.
What was the board's intent?
That the entire chapter applies.
Have you visited Hampton Lodge Campground since 2013?
Yes, sir, I have.
What were the reasons for your visits?
Well, sometimes just for a bike ride, or just to see what's going on the island, say hey to your neighbors. And I've been to the Ducks Unlimited banquets on a few occasions as well.
And what did you observe with regards to number of campsites and the overall footprint compared to the 1995-96 period and the 1980 period?
No change.
In early 2017, you were approached by representatives of a prospective purchaser of the Hampton Lodge campground. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was approached by representatives of Blue Water. They were talking about buying the campground, and they wanted to expand it, and they wanted me to facilitate a community meeting for them. I told them I couldn't tell them, what they could or could not do. We had a community meeting at the Extension Center, and at that time and during conversations, it was acknowledged that there was 234 sites, but they needed more to make it successful and to make it work. And the community said they would not support it. They went forward to the planning board anyways, acknowledging they had 234 sites, asking for an expansion, and they were denied. And we are here tonight.
Now, you are familiar with GIS maps, which are in the possession of Currituck County?
Yes, sir.
If you will, just explain what those maps are.
These are maps that are kept in the county. They're from our GIS system, and they're aerial photographs, and they encompass the year from 1995 all the way through 2016. And if you, although they're not overlaid, but if you will look at each of those maps, you will see that there's been no change to the footprint of the campground from 1995 through 2016, all the way through today. Although we don't have a map of today, but it still looks the same.
Right. One thing I want to ask you, behind the, I guess there's a building that's kind of in the center of most of these. What is that?
That is the rec hall, and those vehicles there represent storage. That's where, when I was young and all through my life, that's where they've kept campers that were stored there, or boats or jet skis. That is not a camping area, that's a storage area.
All right. Mr. Chairman, that would be the questions I would have, Mr. O'Neill.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions. So, Mr. O'Neill, you stated, I thought I heard you say that you thought there were between 150 and
175 and 200.
175 and 200 lots there. And that was in what year did you think that was when you were working there?
1980, the fall of 1980.
Right. And based on these aerial photos, it doesn't appear that a whole lot changed in terms of the actual conditions. And I don't know what time of year these photos were taken, or if if there's anything. I mean, but they look very similar throughout.
Yeah, they're very similar to what it looked like in 1980.
And it's also your, as a former commissioner who was involved in the 2013 version of the UDO, that Chapter 8 for nonconforming uses in its entirety applies to all nonconforming uses.
It's inclusive of all.
So not severable?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, in these pictures, the campers are the same?
Yes, sir.
Continuous. Are those permanent campers?
A lot of them were.
Okay.
A lot of what you're looking at were, and particularly in 1995, if you could zoom in, you'd see porches and additions and decks built onto them. So a lot of them stayed there year round.
Thank you.
As the commissioner, you voted on putting this as non-conforming, and so that the county then would do away with campgrounds.
They could continue to exist as they are. At some point in the future, it was thought nonconforming uses would go away, not intensify.
Correct, that the campgrounds would go away,
Yes,
like
sir.
the trailer parks and the...
Yes, ma'am. And it wasn't just this when it was all three campgrounds. Bell's Island has a similar campground at the end, and Knott's Island does too.
curiosity, why would you want to do away with the campgrounds? You enjoyed it so much as a child. You've stated that, but I don't know why we would want to do away with the campgrounds.
Well, the county was having a continuing issue of zoning violations. We had people living there year-round, and they were not getting cleaned up. The roads, if you go on Bell's Island or Water Lily, the roads have no shoulder. They're very narrow, and it's very dangerous. And there's health and safety reasons you make these decisions as well.
It's like that most of the country, but okay. You're in the woods, it's just, for me, mind-boggling why anyone would want to destroy a family area. Just mind-boggling.
I would agree with you.
So you didn't have to vote for it.
Right, any further comments, questions from the board? No? Okay.
Mr. O'Neill, I have a couple of questions. One, and I'm looking at the ordinance and all the provisions. You talk about mobile homes and other uses, but it's interesting to note, is it not? You said there was no provision for modifications, but actually there is for campgrounds, not the others, but campgrounds in 8.26A5 says modifications can be made, correct?
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, well, I'm look at 8.26A5.
Yes, if you take this as part of the whole Chapter 8, it says you can make modifications to, if you need to change out the electric service to bring it to code, and maintenance and things such as that.
Well, show me where it says electrical code or anything like that.
I don't think it's specified in there, but we've talked about it fully tonight, that you can make maintenance improvements to your property.
Yeah, but it also, I'm asking you about this provision, not any of the others, but it says modifications to existing campgrounds are permitted.
And it's specifically telling you that you cannot increase the number.
Correct. No issue
But
with
then-
that, but I'm saying modifications
But then you
can be made.
you have to take the whole chapter. You can't just take that one piece out.
But does it not say in this provision, at the preamble to this section, it's saying all existing campgrounds and camper subdivisions are non-conforming uses subject to the following standards. So they gave, you've, as a commissioner, passed this giving specific standards for
Yes.
campgrounds, correct?
Along with the rest of the standards.
Right, but as far as campgrounds are concerned, you could have, if you'd chosen to use the general standards, you could have just not included campgrounds, but you did include a provision for campgrounds.
As part of the entire chapter. Not exclusive, it's inclusive.
Now, you also said that that there had been a community meeting and discussing of a number of campsites. Wasn't it true that the discussion at that meeting was 250 hookups were there at the site? You said 234, but wasn't it 250?
I don't recall. What I recall is 450 is what y'all were asking for.
Right.
Which is the number that you've kind of landed on tonight.
Right. But you had said 234. I'm just trying to clarify that. Wasn't it in fact that there were 250 hookups on site?
I don't know if there was 250 or not.
Okay. Do you have any idea when these aerials were taken? What time of the year or anything?
I do not.
I don't have any further questions.
Okay. Mr. McCree?
Mr. Chairman, we would move to introduce the aerials that you have.
Thank you.
I do want to object to that simply for the reason they're not authenticated as far as time or anything like that. I know they're aerials, and obviously they are for the I guess, valid for the purpose of just looking at them, but I have no idea if this is in the dead of winter or early spring or when it is, and that's my concern about these coming in for that purpose. I do have a concern about.
Okay. I understand that concern, and I had similar question myself. I can't tell what time of year it is, although you can look at them and see that there's very little change from year to year, but I have no way of verifying the dates and the times of the year of those.
And that's my concern as well. It would have been better if it had been dated and said this was in the, obviously when you have a campground, there are going to be more people in the summertime as opposed to the spring
absolutely.
or fall or whenever it may be. And I just don't know where these are from. And that's my concern about these particular photos and the reason they're being presented.
Okay.
Did you have any response? Did you want to comment, Mr. Nash, about that?
Well, clearly, you understand the GIS. I think most of you all do that, and this is what we found when we went to. This is what they had for each year. I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly what time of year. I wouldn't attempt to.
Yeah.
Again, that's my concern.
Yeah, and I understand that.
But I think they do generally represent what's there. Whatever time of year it is, I think the point is that there is very little change in year to year.
Yep. So, Ms. Womble, so our, as a board, our authority to accept something into evidence or not, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So in a quasi-judicial proceeding, the rules of evidence apply. They're not strictly construed. There's been multiple things tonight that if we were in a courtroom setting probably would not have been testified to or presented. But the standard is that there would be competent, relevant evidence for you to consider. I think of the definition of competent is does it have an indicia of reliability? I think the question of he testified to the GIS maps. The board's already seen the GIS maps. And there was no objection at that time. I think really the question of the date and what it shows is a question of the weight you will give the evidence. I don't know that it's so much that it's shouldn't be admitted. He testified they were GIS maps. Now, he testified he doesn't know when the pictures were taken by that GIS. You know where they came from. I think the GIS system would be a reliable source, but the weight you give that evidence to a particular issue, I think, would be really the question, not necessarily if it's admitted. The board has already seen it. It's already been presented.
There's no way to object until you go through it. That was, I was objecting to the admission, so.
Can you restate your objection? I'm not sure I'm following you at
I'm
all.
objecting to admitting these into evidence as factual evidence in support is my objection, and it's because they're not authenticated as to they were being presented. The matter they were being presented to substantiate was a number of campsites, but I don't have any indication of when this was taken to substantiate because it will vary during the year as to how many campers are there, and I don't have anything to authenticate it.
Well, I'm inclined to accept the aerial photos into evidence, but with the caution that the weight should be strongly considered, considering the fact that the camping is a seasonal activity and there's no way for us to, and I know on at least one of those aerials, you can see the grass is kind of brown, so it could be early in the season. It's hard to tell, but I think they do tell a story, but the weight that we give to that story should be taken into account.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that would be the showing for the Water Lily Protection Agency.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. So at this point, I'm going to open up the public hearing. If anyone in the public has signed up and would like to speak, if you do, I would ask that we limit it to 2 minutes. In the interest of time, it's getting pretty late, and I know most of you probably want to go home and go to bed by now, but yes. Could you please come to the podium and name and address? Yes.
My name is
Yes.
Jacqueline Myers. My mother Dolores.
Could you give your address as well, name and address?
1548 Water Lily Road,
Okay.
and my mother's 1552 Water Lily Road. My grandmother bought my house in 1966. Mr. Woodall had to get permission from my grandmother because of the circle that's in front of our house is adjoining with the Hampton Lodge property as well as my parents. He had to get permission to create the road into Hampton Lodge. Historically, I have grown up with that campground more than anybody else in this building. I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have seen that campground so packed that at times there have been signs on the gate, there is no vacancies. I worked for the campground on few occasions to fill in so people could go on vacation, and a little bit this summer when Blue Water was purchasing the property. Memorial Day weekend was so packed. I was running the register. The assistant manager was checking people in, and Ann Slade was conducting them to their proper places on the lots. It was packed to capacity, as much as it possibly can. The tent area, depending on when it was, has been used quite a bit. My family, I have cousins that came down, and they would bring at least 5 or 6 tents just for their group. There was also a bathroom connected into the rec hall on the backside because the 2 shower stall that they had in the little brick building was not enough to accommodate the people. I'm telling you, I've grown up there. I've worked there. I know how many lots are there. There are 16 down the middle. There's 140.
I think we're getting on time here.
I know I'm getting short on time, but I'm telling you, it's about 250 to 300, including the tent area. I have seen it go from the greatest time from 79 to about mid-80s, and it was very well run by Uncle Harvey and Mr. Huff. And it has been deteriorating. But in all honesty, these people are trying to make this a better place for families to go and have good camaraderie with friends.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think time's up. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. Could you come to the podium and state your name and address?
Name's Brian Rudeau. I live in Emperor's Isle, which is pretty much off of Water Lily, about a mile up, 2 miles up from Water Lily. I mean, up from the campground. I've seen buses go off the side of the road because of the people coming down.
I object to this testimony for relevance because we're talking about number of campsites and the
I'm just saying
modifications.
that if you can improve that, if you can go ahead and
So
add
hold,
more.
if you'll just hold on one second, and I'm not trying to be rude, but we have an
I'm not
objection.
either. I'm
We
not
just
either.
need to address the objection before we keep going, and I'm not trying to be rude. So we're kind of in a really unique area of quasi-judicial proceedings that interacts with the ordinance, and that the 2 individuals who are commenting, this is really more of a public comment period in our ordinance. These citizens are not under oath, and as we did state earlier, that any comment is not just it has to go directly to the issues at hand. So my recommendation would be that you do sustain that objection and just ask that your comment be directed to the number of campsites and about the your opinion about the interpretation of modification. I think those are the two issues that are here before the board without talking about the road or something like that. I think there's specific issues before the board tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wample. And that objection is sustained. Did you, do you understand what Ms. Wample was saying in terms of the subject matter that you're limited to speaking on?
All I know is I'm talking about if you're going to keep adding to the campground, put some more on the road, more people off the road because there's too many going down the road at the same time now as the season is. And if you just continue to do that, we will have...
I object for the same reason. I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to be rude, but I'm saying anything about the road or any traffic or anything like that is...
Well, I think what he's saying speaks to increased utilization of the campground that's going to be as a result of any upgrades.
But that's not relevant to what's before this board. If it were a special use permit or rezoning, I agree with you. That is relevant, and that's in the ordinance, and that's in the state statutes, and I totally agree with that. But this is an interpretational thing about how many campsites were in existence and what the ordinance means with respect to modification, which is different. And I do understand that, and that's hard to, believe me, I understand, and I do appreciate it. So that's the basis of my objection.
So, again, this is a very unique area because this testimony is not sworn. So this board has to, and we talked about this at the beginning, this is a procedural requirement that the ordinance has in terms of this comment. So this board, when you move to the point where you are ready to deliberate and make a decision, this board is making a decision based on the sworn, competent,
Absolutely.
material evidence that was presented to you. Again, I understand the objection. I understand that he's trying to communicate about and what he feels a modification would intensify a use.
Exactly.
And so I would just ask that without going into, because there are legal standards by which if you're talking about traffic or other things, and that's not before the board tonight, that does have to be there can be lay testimony about that, but for the board to consider testimony about increased traffic or property values, for instance, those things have to be done by an expert. So I'm not trying to cut you off. I just would ask that you would kind of focus your comments on, and your concern is intensification, for instance, without necessarily going into all of the reasons why. I think before there was an objection, you stated that if you keep adding to the campground, that it will intensify the use. I think that's what he's trying to say. So
7 to 8 miles
but
residential area
I understand. So
that you have to go through to get to the campground.
I understand. So I think what he's trying to
Right.
he's trying to share his concerns about adding what
Intensification.
intensification.
Yeah,
So
understood. All right. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Renee Costanzo. We will be officially moving to 1540 Water Lily Road. I've been working on my cottage that I just purchased. It is very close to the campground. And my concern is the intensification. I've stayed there enough to realize that the trailers that drive by at very alarming speeds are dangerous. And if more of those keep going back and forth.
Sorry, I have to object again, and I'm not meaning to be rude. If I don't object, it becomes a problem for me. So.
If there are more trailers that
we're not
go
going to argue back and forth, okay? So we are progressing
Right.
in a public hearing, and I know this is a very serious
Just let me
concern.
speak my 2 minutes instead
And,
of wasting it.
well, again, just like we discussed earlier, this is not just a free public comment period. We are within the bounds. This is a really cloudy area in terms of procedures. So
I think
Your point on intensification is
the
taken, yes.
intensification and more traffic going by my house because of that intensification.
Right, thank you.
puts my family at danger.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Richard Clinton, and I live at 1315 Water Lily Road. My concern here is water. If they add any more campsites up there, you've got a 3-inch pipe feeding that whole road. Where are you going to get an extra 50 gallons a day per person?
Right, again, intensification again. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? All right. Any further discussion by the board on anything that we were doing? Yes. So at this point, I will close the public hearing portion of this meeting and go into further discussion by the board.
Well, I think at this point, the attorneys would like to submit a closing argument, though given the hour, I'm certain they're going to be very direct in their closing. But at this point, they would have the opportunity to kind of summarize the evidence and summarize the law that they argue applies.
Okay.
At this point, so I think, turn it over. So.
Who goes first on it? I'm not going to object to going first, but I want to, if everybody else is fine with that, I'll go ahead. You fine? Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead. Thank you for your patience tonight, and I know this is an emotional issue, and it's a long issue, and it's difficult to get through. But there still comes down to the 2 points. How many campsites were there in 2013, and about the modifications provision. The number of campsites we have, we kind of need to piece together what was said. And from our side of the story, we've got Lucky Pappas, who's been there a long time, and he said, there were somewhere in the range of 250 to 290 hookups, electrical hookups, but he would also have campers there who did not need hookups. And there was plenty of open space to do that. So you piece that together with what Mr. Edis did in going through and overlaying the 3,000 square foot requirement and how you could park campers in the open space in that campground through his investigations of all the various maps and all the various information that was publicly available, including looking at the aerial photographs. So I think what you can piece together from that is a number that you're looking at is around that 458 range, being 408 RV campers, which would include those that had hookups, again, within the range of, if you say 250, so say 250 of those, plus those that didn't have hookups, which there's plenty of open space with roads in there where you could park campers without hookups. And Mr. Pappas said they would fill it up, if it was all open for camping. They never did turn away anybody from camping in those open spaces. So that's the story that weaves together from both of their testimonies. Someone who's owned it for 40 years and said how many he's had there, upwards of 400 folks there, and the investigation from just based upon the standards that had existed. And keep in mind, this was a campsite that preceded a lot of the other development that's in the area. It's been there forever. The development and the other changes came to it. It did not come to them. And so, yes, it's non-conforming, but the commissioners, did their best to say, we're going to find a place and time where we count, and that was January 1st, 2013. We've got information that there weren't changes over a period of time. Okay, if there weren't changes before or after that date, then it stayed pretty much the same. And then you take that with what Mr. Pappas and Mr. Edis said, and you're looking at not 234, because 234 is only part of, it was a sketch, and it was only part of the campground. It didn't even include everywhere that you could use in the campground. including the Cedars area and some of those other areas where they have obviously tent camped for the stargazers and others. So you can't just take that point in time from a special event permit, because it was not for approval of the campground as a whole. It was for one specific event that they presented a map in 96 and 97, or just a sketch in 96 and 97 to get a special event, to have the Bluegrass Festival, and didn't include everywhere that they could camp. But that wasn't the way the reality was. The reality was camping occurred on the whole site where it was open, in the tent camping area on the far, what I say, the far end of the camp, and in the tent camping in the Cedars, and occasionally some trailers in the Cedars that were self-supporting. So I would urge you to come down along the lines of putting what Mr. Edis said together with Mr. Pappas, and we're around that 400 number. And that's consistent with some of the case law. It's in the packet. Stokes County case where there was a junkyard. It wasn't fully full when the county passed an ordinance eliminating junkyards. And the court said you can go fill up that open space that you had cleared out for the junkyard, even though you might not have junk cars everywhere. And that's all we're saying on this. Even though you didn't have campsites everywhere, you could fill up that open space because it was available for camping even in January 1 of 2013. And you have to look at that specifically because campgrounds were given a specific provision. The law is the specific controls the general. If it had just been the general nonconforming language, I could agree with what was said here of a lot of the 8.1 and whatever, because it would cover it. But the county commissioner saw fit to specifically address campgrounds, mobile homes, and some of the other ways, other uses as being nonconforming. And the law is that specific controls the general. So the specific's going to count. And so you're looking at the number of campsites as a standard under nonconforming campgrounds in 8.2.6. You just cannot ignore that because, as some of the cases have said, that would lead to an illogical and absurd result if you ignore it. In terms of modifications, the only provision in the ordinance for nonconforming uses that provides for modifications is for campgrounds. And the limitation, and the sole limitation in this provision is it says, as long as it doesn't increase the nonconformity with respect to the number of campsites on January 1, 2013. And we're not saying we're going to put a Walmart or anything like that. We're talking about supporting amenities to the campground. The best example I could come up with in my mind is say you have two 100-room hotels. You could put 100 or guests and families in those hotels, 200 room. Same intensity with either one of them. One has a pool and a restaurant and the other one doesn't. Doesn't make one any more intense than the other. They're both 100-room hotels. It's just one has more amenities or better amenities. Some folks may like the fact it's got a pool and want to use the pool. Others, as I've been in some hotels, may not want the pool because it's noisy and late at night and they want to get some sleep. But still, the intensity doesn't change, and that's what this ordinance is talking about with modifications. The intensity comes from the number of campsites you have, not the amenities that serve the campers. We're not talking about a swimming pool we sell memberships to. We're not talking about a restaurant that we have people from the outside, or a snack bar that people from the outside can come to. We're not, if we want to put a porch on the store, it's not going to increase the intensity, the number of people that are going to use that campground just because you put a covered porch on the store for the convenience of the people that are there. That's the point with the modification provision. And if we didn't want modifications, the commissioners would not have done this. But this is a pretty darn specific provision that was well thought of and passed. And Mr. O'Neill went through how many public hearings and everything that went through. If that's the case, and it says it right here, the language is pretty clear. I don't know how you could disagree with that. Again, my hotel example, I think that fits in perfectly here. That's my argument. Number being 400 RV sites and 50 tent campsites, and modifications, as long as there are amenities that support the campground but don't increase the intensity, which none of these amenities that we proposed increase the intensity, including one thing, that the water tank is to address the one public concern about the water. And the only reason that was proposed to be done is to not impact the residents specifically. So that is our position. hope the board takes a really careful look at that and makes a decision based upon what the law says and what it says here in the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. As we were dealing with the non-conforming use, I think it's important, and it's kind of been glossed over this evening, to focus also on the definition of non-conforming use set out in the UDO, which is a non-conforming use is any actual and active use lawfully being made of any land which exists on the effective date of this ordinance and renders such existing use illegal within a district or which does not comply in any fashion with any of the regulations of this ordinance or any amendments thereto. It goes on, the definition, a use or activity that was lawful, keyword, was lawful prior to the adoption, revision, or amendment of the zoning ordinance, but that fails by reason of such adoption to conform to the present requirements of the zoning district. And so during the course of the hearing, you heard, particularly from Ms. LaCicero, the planning director, her analysis and review of the county's historical records and how this particular campground seems to have grown beyond that which it could lawfully have grown as a non-conforming use beginning at least in 1971 when the first zoning ordinance was adopted, up until 1975 when she testifies there were 101 lots from her research and map that was available in 75 from a conditional use permit hearing. And so the question then becomes, well, of course they needed to do something. It seems the owners needed to do something to become lawful use by complying with the ordinance changes over the years, and they took a risk and never did anything about that. They can't claim tonight, well, he didn't have to do, the owners never had to do anything with regard to trying to come into conformity because they were grandfathered in 1967 for 6 campsites was a testimony. I'm going to cite quickly Huntington Properties versus Currituck County. It's a 2002 Court of Appeals case relative to an issue similar to this one in Currituck County. With regard to nonconforming uses, the Court of Appeals said that this court has consistently held that nonconforming uses are common. However, any expansion of nonconforming uses is subject to regulation. Zoning ordinances are construed against indefinite continuation of a nonconforming use. Ordinances in general are construed to give effect to all of their parts, if possible. Moreover, nonconforming uses are not favored by the law. Most zoning schemes foresee elimination of nonconforming uses either by amortization or attrition or other means. In accordance with this policy, and this is state policy, zoning ordinances are strictly construed against indefinite continuation of nonconforming uses. And so what that is telling you is you should strictly construe the nonconforming section of the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 8, against the continuation of this nonconforming campground, over and beyond and above that which we submit has been determined by the planning director in her analysis to be the number of campsites that were in existence on January 1st, 2013. Now, with regard to Ms. LaCicero's analysis of campsites, she testified, and it was also in her staff report, that there is no definition, no defined term for campsite. And much like the exercise she went through to determine the definition of modification, which is not a defined term in the UDO, she followed the requirements and direction of Section 10.1.12 of the UDO, which says that the zoning administrator has the authority to define words that are not defined. It is Ms. LaCicero's authority to define terms not defined. And how is she to do that? where she is to look at planning director's glossary, zoning development and planning terms book, or other accepted sources, which can include a dictionary, which is what she testified and writes in her report that she relied upon. Well, actually, she relied upon one of the planning books for the definition of campsite. And so she determined, under her authority, that a campsite is a plot, parcel, or tract or portion thereof intended for exclusive occupancy by a camping unit. And a camping unit is defined as a tent, trailer, lean-to, or recreational vehicle or similar structure. A campsite is a parcel or part thereof intended for exclusive occupancy by a camping unit, A being one. And so for the applicant to argue to you that willy-nilly someone can fall out on the ground one night or two nights and that makes it a campsite is contrary to the definition and term defined by the planning director under her authority as zoning administrator. And I would note that that was not appealed to this Board of Adjustment, and thus it applies to this particular case we would submit. Now, going through her analysis, what did Ms. LaCicero consider? Well, she considered the prior applications of Hampton Lodge owners. She looked at all the historical documentary evidence in possession of the county, including electricals and septic permits, and with those could only come up to 190 particular sites. She considered the 1996 use permit application and map that was submitted by the applicant to support their application. And now they would say, well, that map really isn't fully show what was going on at Campton Lodge and really shouldn't be counted for something, I suppose. But yet we also heard from Mr. Pappas that the very map that was presented to this board tonight and was presented to the Board of Commissioners in a evidentiary hearing in 1996 and 1997 was the same map in the camp store that they relied upon in order to assign people to a place to go camp. But now they want to say that really was just a sketch plan and doesn't have any meaning. And so Ms. LaCicero relies upon that and finds that there's 234 sites identified there. And as to tent camping, there is in fact a delineated area that says tent area. And on top of that, she presented to you photographic evidence of a sign at the tent area saying that's what it is, with water spigots and picnic tables spread throughout, which would indicate, yes, that more likely than not was the picnic area. Now, she's not been able to determine the number of campsites, but could possibly make a determination at a later time, taking into account 3,000 square feet and the amount of area that exists for this delineated tent area. Now, the applicant says we've got 250, heck, we've got 700 campsites, a right to it, that they existed at January 1st, 2013. But what they really have is, first of all, they finally acknowledge a plat that was never approved by the county commissioners, but they act as if it somehow has some kind of validity and should be relied upon by this board. And then Mr. Edis testifies, well, you know, what all those lots really are, they're opportunity. The cleared land and area in the campsite or on the campground is opportunity, not that which is in existence. And Mr. Pappas himself testified and said a couple of times, I didn't buy campsites, I bought a campground. I don't know how many campsites there are. So that's what we're left with, is the documentary evidence and research and analysis by the planning director. Now, further with regard to the tent sites, we also have the applicant claiming that a certain number of campsites exist, particularly tent campsites, because they have stargazers that allegedly or purportedly appeared a couple times a year over a period of time and fell out somewhere on the ground and camped, and thus that established a campsite. Well, we would submit that, again, under the term and definition of campsite as Ms. LaCicero found, does not constitute the creation of a tent campsite. And to support even the stargazer camping, they present to you as evidence, it appears to be 18 receipts from one weekend in May of 2013, which, by the way, is a date after January 1st, 2013, which was the cutoff date for campsites. With regard to modification, and what does that mean? Well, we would submit that, again, not as a defined term in section 10.1.12 tells the planning director what she is to do to make a determination or define the term. And so she did that. She's provided a definition for modification in her letter of determination, which is to change something, an alteration or amendment, the making of a limited change in something. And she went on to say something needs to exist before a change or alteration or an amendment to it can be made. She testified further to you, as directed by the UDO, that she was to consider in interpreting an ordinance or a word and its meaning pursuant to 2.4.16 of the UDO, she was to consider the clear and plain meaning of the provision's word as defined by the meaning and significance giving specific terms used in the provision, the intended purpose of the provision as indicated by purpose statements, its context and consistency with surrounding and related provisions and any legislative history related to its adoption, and the general purposes served by the ordinance, as well as consistency with the land use plan. And she testified that she took into consideration those things. Now, what the applicant would have you do is to ignore the entirety of Chapter 8 of the UDO and apply only one paragraph or one sentence in support of an argument that they can put whatever they want to on this property so long as it doesn't add to the number of campsites. Now, they're sitting here assuring you, oh, we're only going to do those things that would make a campground better. Really? They could put the 100 or 200 room hotel from their argument that Mr. Johnson was just speaking of in his example on that property. If you accept their argument, they can put anything on there because hotel wouldn't increase the number of campsites. There are any number of things that could be placed on this property that wouldn't increase the number of campsites, but it surely would not be in keeping with the spirit, intent, purpose, and plain reading of Chapter 8 of the Unified Development Ordinance as it relates to nonconformities. Since it's late, I'll go ahead and wrap up. And I want to go back to Huntington Properties versus Currituck County because it also, the Court of Appeals spoke to what is to be done with regard to an interpretation. Well, first of all, the Court of Appeals says statutes dealing with the same subject matter must be construed together and harmonized if possible to give effect to each. The various provisions of an act should be read so that all may, if possible, have their due and conjoint effect without repugnancy or inconsistency so as to render the statute a consistent and harmonious whole. Portions of the same statute, in this case an ordinance, dealing with the same subject matter are to be considered and interpreted as a whole, and in such case it is the accepted principle of statutory construction that every part of the law shall be given effect if this can be done by any fair and reasonable intendment. And as you've heard also tonight, that you're not to interpret an ordinance in such a way that it creates absurd or illogical results. And I would submit, going back again to their claim they can put anything on this property that they want to so long as it doesn't increase campsites, is indeed an absurd and illogical result if the rest of that chapter is ignored. Now, how does Huntington Properties versus Currituck County apply here tonight? Well, in Huntington, there was a provision within the UDO at the time very similar to the provision that's facing us tonight. The UDO provided improvements to a water and wastewater sewage treatment system serving a mobile home park for purpose of improving public health that will not result in an increase in the number of mobile homes within the park shall be permitted. Sound familiar? Improvements to a treatment system that does not increase the number of mobile homes within the park shall be permitted. Well, much like you're hearing tonight from this applicant, that property owner at Orchard Park up in northern Currituck argued, well, we still get to improve our treatment system because we're not adding mobile homes. The county disagreed, and so did the Court of Appeals when it said, moreover, we agree with the defendants that plaintiffs' proposed upgrade in Orchard Park's wastewater treatment system was an increase in the extent of the nonconforming use. Defendants' attempts to prevent this expansion is in harmony with the state's policy of construing ordinances against the expansion of a nonconforming use. We would submit that case is applicable, is more in line and on point than any of the other cases cited tonight. And for these and all the other reasons stated just a few moments ago, we would submit that the Board of Adjustment should and can properly uphold and affirm the planning administrator's letter of determination.
Thank you.
I'm not going to repeat any of that, or I'm going to try not to. Thank you for your attention and time tonight. It means a lot, certainly to my clients. One of the things I would like to remind you of is that the applicant has the burden of proof here. That's very important. And we feel that the county planner got it right. After an exhaustive review of the history of the campground, the county records, she determined that there are 234 campsites. The only evidence that I heard tonight of any site plan being submitted was the one that was submitted back in 1996 and 1997, and it said 234 campsites. That's the only evidence. You may recall differently, but that's what I recall. We have presented what we feel is credible evidence from a number of witnesses that basically say, look, from 1980 or before through 2013, the footprint didn't change. The number of campsites didn't change. We feel that 234 is the right number. As to the other issue, I would remind the board that, as Ike just said, you've got to take the whole chapter in harmony. And the first part of that chapter says, you know, it limits continued existence of non-conforming uses. They should not engage in any activity that increases non-conformity. Minor repairs allowed, provided the minor repairs or maintenance does not extend, expand, or enlarge the non-conformity aspect, and except in accordance with subsection, a non-conforming use shall not be enlarged, expanded in area, or intensified. That's clear. And the UDO does define expansion. Expansion is an increase in the size of an existing structure or use, including physical size of the property, building, parking, and other improvements and structures. I would submit that the word enlargement means an increase in the scope, the scale, or extent of a non-conforming use. I think, frankly, that the evidence is clear that any new bathroom, swimming pool, pool house, and the like are not permitted under the ordinance and would constitute an impermissible expansion, enlargement, and intensification of a non-conforming use. We ask on behalf of the Water Lily Protection Agency that you uphold the letter of determination submitted by the county planner. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we will have some discussion here on the board. I will start by saying that we've heard a lot of testimony over a lot of hours here tonight. And, you know, this meeting, the purpose of this meeting was to answer two basic questions. Number one, what was the actual number of lots or sites, campsites in existence as of January 1, 2013? And in my opinion, I still don't know the answer to that question. And that's, in my opinion, that's a problem, because that is the basis for the rest of the discussion. Based on that, the only documented number that we seem to have heard tonight is, ironically, from the previous owner himself, with the submittals for the special event permits, and which the staff has also honed in on that number. We've heard a lot of different numbers, as high as 700 campsites. I don't believe that the UDO provisions speak to potential. I think it's the status of the camping facility as of January 1, 2013, and I don't believe that I heard anything that would make me think the number 234 was any different. I heard lots of numbers, but not really any documented proof of the status at that date. And that's the first part. The second part is, as far as the modifications, I think that's a pretty cut and dried case in my opinion. I have been involved in regulatory analysis my entire career. I've worked for state government my entire career. I do this for a living, and I do not see where we could fail to evaluate Chapter 8 in its entirety. I'm troubled by the idea of just looking at Section 8.2.6 and the broad use of the term modification, because in reality, if we look at it that way, you really could do anything if you don't go over 234 lots, and I do not think that that's the intent of the non-conforming uses provision of the UDO. I think it's intended to phase out these uses over time, not build them up and improve them. Any thoughts?
I tend to agree that we don't know about the lots or campsites, whatever you want to call them. I don't believe we've seen any proof to, even if there was 234. And that's troubling. That's troubling. I think the county dropped the ball. They made they made a rule. I work for Centera. We have 55,000 employees. If the rule comes down that we are not going to have any more RNs over what we have on December 31st, well, management's going to make sure how many are there on that date. And I think the county should have gone to each one of these campgrounds and said, okay, this is the new rule. Now we're going to do an inspection and find out how many we need a plat and how many campsites you actually have. And that's it. But they didn't do that. So there is a lot of onus on them. And there's some onus on Mr. Pappas, he was a lawyer. He should have known things were going on. But he was an absentee owner. The other guy, Mr. Jameson, should have said, hey, this was going on as well. I don't think there was open communication, and it's clear, as Mr. O'Neill had put, the county doesn't want campgrounds. They don't want families here. We got families on the beach. I guess they don't want them here. It's disturbing. It's disturbing to me that they want to do away with something as simple as I've camped all over this country, and I've been in campgrounds that you don't have a door on the shower. You don't even have a shower curtain. And I've been in pleasure ones in Yosemite and Yellowstone, and you have all the privacy, and it's as clean as a whistle. You could actually eat off the floor. And those are the ones I prefer, but I agree. We don't know how many were here. From the county, we have something that says there's 700 plus lots. And all the Woodalls had to do was post a bond, and that may have been approved. We don't know whether it would have been approved or not. We don't have the minutes from that meeting. I have no idea. Maybe they did get a bond but never went through with it. So maybe those 700 lots were approved. We don't know. And there's too many ifs for me. And for the county I believe there's no modifications. I believe they don't want anything done. If the gutter falls off, go ahead, go fix it. But other than that, don't fix it. And if you're using bathroom facilities where you're using water and you've got a 5-gallon flush toilet from 1972 and you don't want to upgrade it to a half-a-gallon flush toilet now, I mean, you're talking about water issues. That's the main thing. So if it's going to be in existence, I think that it needs to be upgraded and allowed to be upgraded, just like your home and my home. It's not only just an asset, but you can't turn around and say, no, you can't do anything. And if there's an issue with the roads and where things go, well, that's a different issue. And that comes with a different department of the county. That's not us right now. But I'm just not satisfied with what we've seen to say how many lots are there. And I mean, certainly it's a huge piece of property and they could put that many there. I mean, as long as the wetlands and all that gets put into say. But I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence for either way. Maybe I don't know. What do you
I
guys
just
think?
wanted to add one thing. I don't think the ordinance is saying that they can't do anything. I think they can make repairs and maintenance that would be considered routine, like you would do to your house, but you can't add an addition. I can't add an addition to my house. I can make routine maintenance in my house, but, I think we're kind of getting into, adding brand new facilities that don't exist right now is a different thing than routine
You're
maintenance.
accommodating what's there. And one bathhouse doesn't do it for 200 or 100 even 50 lots. One
That's the
bathhouse
whole
doesn't.
point.
But that's the whole
The whole
point of
point
the
of
nonconformity.
this is exactly that. You stated it and maybe not realized it, but the whole point is that to not extend a nonconforming. That's the whole point. I'll restate, we've heard lots of testimony over lots of hours, and I appreciate all the time and effort that everyone put into that. But, Mr. Pappas kind of framed it best himself. And I think the facts and the evidence are overwhelming, unfortunately. for one party. But Mr. Papa said that he didn't count sites. There were no sites. It was just one big campground. Well, that's one site. He had one site then. I can go through and I can count campers on the GIS photos as well as the photos submitted by Williams and Mullen, and I can never come up with more than 150 campers, period. Never more than 150, and I don't care what time of year the pictures were taken. This is a random sampling of something, and I can't count more than 150 campers. So I don't know how we come up with a larger number than that. Apparently we've gone out and we've counted sites, although the definition of a site varied in testimony from being what is at a traditional campground, a full hookup with 30 and 50 amp water and sewer, to some sites had
just
water
boondocking
and sewer but no electricity, or some had electricity but no water and no sewer. So we didn't even get a good sense of what they were calling a site. But what we do have a very good sense of is the number of campers that have been on that property at any given time. We've got a very good understanding of that if you go through and do what I did and start counting rooftops on campers. You know, extending a nonconformability, that's really what we're talking about. And to allow the addition of landmass, and I'll read it again, existing campgrounds may not be expanded to cover additional land area, period. It doesn't say go outside the bounds of the property, the 450 acres, and add to it. It says campgrounds may not be expanded to cover additional land area. To cover more land area and to make further improvements is to extend the nonconformity.
It's to extend the boundaries of what you've got.
I got
Land
to say
mass.
something. I got to say something right now. First of all, yes, you could, if you look at the pictures and do start counting, you see 150 trailers there. Many of those are the ones that obviously over time were parked there all year.
They did
Some of them
annual
at the time were
spots.
probably people living in them all year when the county was unsuccessful in pushing the ordinance and keeping people out of there, whatever, that's history. But that's a shot in time for one weekend. You've had people have talked about going there and seeing a large number of people there for other different occasions, different weekends. We don't have those air photos showing that number of people there in those other spots that in the springtime of the year, because most of these look like they happened in the winter, early spring, at least the ones that were handed out last. Those are, you're not seeing Memorial Day weekend, you're not seeing Labor Day weekend, you're not seeing summer weekends, or you're not seeing, shoulder season weekends in the number of people. So I think there were probably more on average than 150 campers there at any one time. I think, in my previous life, I know a little bit about campgrounds. I spent 38 years working for the U.S. Forest Service, which is the largest land management agency in the country, as an engineer, building campgrounds, rebuilding campgrounds, and everything else that goes with it. So I think that what we've missed is there are more people in that. Now, again, I'm with you and everyone else here. I really don't know what the number is. I mean, I would go with 234 because that's what, we heard from the planning analysis. And I'd even say there's probably some additional tent sites because tent sites are, you don't really need to go by 3,000
I
square
haven't been
feet
to
on
a
that.
campground that labels their tent site. The
No,
tents are
we
over
have
there.
large areas where you can just go put
Go
100
over
tents
and-
or one tent.
Right.
But that's probably beyond the discussion for now. But I think that, and in terms of the facilities, first of all, I think the county got it wrong. I don't think campground should be a non-conforming use, but it is, and we have to live within the UDO that says that part of it. But the other part is that the campground, those facilities, the health and the restrooms, shower buildings are probably beyond repair. There's probably no way you can fix them they're outdated, they're out of compliance in terms of health and safety. And the only way to take care of that is to tear it down and build a new one, in-kind replacement, for lack of a better term, of what you have. Now, in-kind replacement is probably going to be half-gallon flush toilets, fully accessible facilities
For
people
handicap.
with disabilities, complying with ADA. So that's in-kind replacement that, to me, still means somebody could do,
But I don't
still
think
something
that's what-
within,
yeah.
I think it's within something that's the non-compliant.
Yeah, and I don't think that's what was proposed. I mean, it was
In-kind
proposed
replacements
was
with new
improvement,
facilities.
plus the swimming pools and things like that,
I'm not really there yet on that either.
Yeah.
And if I could just interject briefly as you're in your discussion, just something to think about. I keep hearing you talk about, well, I don't know what the number is, I don't know what the number is. Well, that's really one of the biggest reason you're here tonight is because it's your job to determine what that number is based on the evidence that was presented to you. We've had several hours of testimony. I understand, and this is kind of we talked about you sitting as a judge, and the judge has to take all of the evidence that was presented and make a decision based on what was presented as what your finding is going to be. So you have to put weight to the evidence that was presented to you. We talked about that regarding those aerial photos. What weight are you going to give particular evidence? And so your role here tonight is to determine, excuse me, and evaluate the evidence that was presented and make a determination about the number of campsites. Now, and this is also just kind of a general thing I want to interject here. You're sitting here tonight as a judge, but you are ultimately reviewing Ms. LoCicero's decision. You can affirm her decision, you can completely disagree with her decision, or you can amend her decision, meaning you can agree with a portion of it, but disagree with another portion of it. So you can break this decision apart. This is, at this point, you were the one making the determination. Regarding the modifications, and I keep hearing you talk about in generalities, why I think you could do this. We have to create an order from what your decision is tonight. And so I would ask, particularly, you've reviewed the ordinance. The ordinance has been argued to you repeatedly. I would ask that if you make a decision or discuss a specific finding of fact is what the language I'm using, but if you're saying, I'm going to use your replacement statement, Mr. Hicks, as an example. If you say, I think that this is what is permitted, then I would like you to tell me where and why you think it is permitted within the ordinance, not just how you feel, because we have to put aside how we feel. This is not a legislative decision; it's a judicial decision. So we have to apply the law to the facts. So if you were going to make a motion, or as you progress through this, I would ask that you apply. Refer specifically why you think that is permitted where, so we can make an order that we can operate from.
So let's start with the number of campsites. In the staff's analysis, when they came up with the 234 campsites, that did not include the tent sites. So I would fall on the side of the 234 campsites, improved campsites, plus some number of tent sites. I heard a number of numbers bounced around. I thought I heard 75, I think, at some point. Any thoughts on that? Because that part was not really addressed in the staff's analysis of the number of campsites, the tent sites.
Well, I think you would have to go back and on the tents, if I understood it correctly, the tent sites would as well have to be 3,000 square feet. So you'd have to have the total land mass of the tent area and divide that by 3,000 to come up with the maximum number of tent sites.
That's assuming if you're looking at potential. So we don't really know what the actual was.
About that, I didn't hear any requirement that there is a 3,000 square foot measurement on the tent site.
It was
in the ordinance or in your definition.
It was in the ordinances that were in place prior to 2013.
Okay.
All of the ordinances, I believe, from 71 all the way up till the 2013 one
2013.
all had the 3,000 square foot minimum.
Okay.
So, and I do know on the, if we're going to go by the map that the staff used, that was also used for the special event permits, where the 234 campsites were identified, then there also, and we talked about this earlier, there also was an area delineated on that map that said tent sites. Again, that map doesn't have a scale to it. There may be some GIS type of activities that could be done to figure out what that area is on that map, or was intended to represent, and do a calculation that way to figure out the number of tent sites. But as far as the improved sites, the only documented number that I've heard tonight was the 234.
Those are ones with hookups.
Yeah.
And I'm good with that number as well. The boondocking segment of camping is not nearly as huge as those of us who like the luxury of a 30 and 50 amp hookup. There's a small segment of the population. There's people that are willing to go camp without electricity, and with no electricity, you've got no water because you can't pump it out of your tank, and you've got no air conditioning, and you've got no sewer hookup, and not many people are willing to do that.
I do that only when we're traveling from time to time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to go and get a full hookup. I'm only going to be there the night.
Yeah.
Even sometimes for 2 days. I use my batteries. I don't need my air conditioner. My husband doesn't need his TV. So,
All right.
I'd like to make some comments.
Yeah, please do.
you've been very quiet.
From the evidence that has been presented, it appears that the only verified number of sites on the subject property that we're talking about is 234. There were documents submitted in 96 and 97 that showed 234 sites. In my experience serving on the planning board from 2013 to 2018 for 6 years, many times nonconformities were an issue. Every single time nonconformities typically were opposed. Mr. Johnson, Attorney Johnson, used a hotel example earlier, talking about 100 rooms here and 100 rooms here, and the pool being behind one, and maybe it wouldn't cause a problem, but the flaw in his description was that he didn't mention that it was non-conforming. So that is null and void. Mr. McCree mentioned key words that we need to be aware of: lawful, all of the rules in Section 8 regarding nonconformity, exclusivity. All of those points are very pertinent and apply directly to this case. The applicant has not proven through their evidence that the number is different than 234 that's ever been recorded anywhere. On tab number 6 shows the 1996 and 1997 submittal to the county for the special use permit for the event. On tab number 7, it shows a nice laid out plat of 439 lots, which was never recorded or approved by the Currituck County Board of Commissioners at any time. Tab number 8 shows that same plat overlaid on an aerial view of the subject property. And specifically, this was done in 2017, and the word that is key on this particular map says possible existing formal and informal campsites. It doesn't say existing, it says possible. Based on all this evidence, I believe that the correct number that we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt is 234.
Any discussion of the tent sites in addition to that? All right. So, do I have a motion regarding this item?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, please. I'd like to make a motion that the Board of Adjustment affirms the determination by Ms. Lori LaCicero based on the findings of facts that there have been no additional plats submitted to the County of Currituck that show any different than 234 lots, and that according to the evidence supplied by the applicant on tab 6 and tab 7, tab 8, that these are hypothesized lots that have never been actually recorded and approved by the Currituck County Board of Commissioners at any time in the past.
This doesn't have any of the tents on it. Doesn't have anything for the tent area.
I'm still making the motion.
Okay.
And that Ms. LaCicero did not make an error or incorrectly determined the number of lots that are existing on January 1, 2013. That's the end of my motion.
Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Are there any final announcements?
What about the modification
I was
portion?
just going to ask the same question. So you spoke specifically to the campsites, and you made kind of you made several statements there. One was to uphold her determination, to affirm her determination, excuse me, I think was the language. And then you went on specifically to discuss the number of campsites. Was your motion inclusive of her entire determination, or just the campsites itself? Because you still have a second issue to address in
Just
terms
the
of
campsites.
her part two of the
About modifications.
about modification.
I apologize. I'd like to amend my motion.
Well, you've already made a motion; it's passed. So
Right.
I think you
Okay.
would need to make
Second motion.
a second motion, unless you're saying your motion. Well, one, I think based on the board's response, they thought your motion was going to be divided in addressing one issue first, and that was the intent of the motion. So if you will, I think you would need to make a second motion to address the modification piece
Okay.
of her determination.
All right. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
All right. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to affirm the determination of Lori LaCicero in regards to the modifications based on the fact that the findings of fact that Chapter 8 of the UDO in regards to nonconformity is general and specific, and that any modifications other than basic repairs, routine maintenance in accordance with the requirements of that chapter as a means of preserving safety and appearance would be unlawful if they were different than what was in section 8.1.2.
All right, do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Before the vote, I did want to have a clarification on that. Are you upholding Ms. LaCicero's decision? Is that the motion? If that is, she said construction within the footprint of the existing buildings was okay, so I'm trying to make sure, just to clarify your motion.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So you're affirming her determination
Correct.
as set forth in her letter of
Correct.
determination?
Okay. That helps me, because I was hearing a change, and I don't know that that was intended, and I just wanted to make
I
sure.
don't think so.
Right. So we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right. And I understand there are no announcements, so at this point, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second that.
Second. All right. Meeting adjourned.